Sponsors for today?
I think it's the same for the...
Just a weekly and the monthly? What'd you say?
I assume it's the same.
Okay. Okay, good morning. The sponsors, the weekly sponsors, Aaron and Alana Weinberg, with gratitude and thanks to Hashem for Yonatan Shai Weinberg's full recovery 8 years ago. The monthly sponsor is Uncle Mike Holtzman in honor of all who keep the Daf Yomi going. Okay, we're going to begin the bottom of Hayamid Beis, about 6 lines up from the bottom. So just the recap is we're in the middle of a discussion between Abaye and Rava. Abaye said that whenever the Torah tells you don't do something, so the starting point is I should assume if a person would transgress and do that thing, that it would be mahani, it would work. Right? So the Torah says don't marry this woman. If the person would go and marry her without any other psukim, Abaye says I would assume it would be effective. Rava said the opposite. Rava said no, when the Torah says don't do something, so then it's logical if a person would go and try to do it, it would not work. So far we went through a bunch of examples and tried to prove one way or the other. And so far the Gemara came out that in every case they're really going to agree to each other. The starting point is different. In other words, Abaye starts with the starting point that if the Torah says don't do it, it would be effective. So any cases that we had which were clear it wouldn't work, those were exceptions to the rule, and he explained why they were exceptions. And Rava, the starting point was the opposite, that the Torah says not to do something, it would not work. So every place we found it does work, those were exceptions to the rule. But so far, they've really come out the same in every case. Okay, so the bottom of Hayamid Beis is about 6 lines up. If a person would go and sanctify an animal which has a blemish to the Mizbeach. So basically the Beis HaMikdash has basically two separate sections. One is Kodshei Bedek Abayis, which is just the Beis HaMikdash financially owns items. The other is Kodshei Mizbeach, things which are actually brought onto the altar, animals that are brought as karbanos. Now the rule is you're not allowed to bring something with a blemish onto the Mizbeach. So let's say a person would go and sanctify something to the Mizbeach, to the altar, something that has a blemish. The Rachmana Amar, the Torah says, Kol asher bo mum lo sakrivu. Torah says anything with a blemish, you can't bring it. The Gemara is going to understand later, it means you can't be makdash it, you can't sanctify it. So that's our negative commandment, to not sanctify an animal with a mum to bring as a carbon. V'tnan, in the Mishnah said, makdash bali mum and l'gabi mizbeach. If a person would do that, afal pishu below saseh, even though he did a negative commandment, masha asa asri, still it's effective. And the hektish, the sanctification that he did, worked. To yufta the Rava, so we see not like Rava. According to Abaye, the Torah said not to do this, and if I did it, it's effective. But according to Rava, why, if the Torah says not to sanctify such an animal, so why is it effective? Says Rava, that's different because in that parsha it says it should not be brought as a carbon. So it sounds like ritzui hu delo meratze. It sounds like the Torah is saying you can't, that which you did, you can't actually bring it as an offering, hamikdash kadshi. But it sounds like the Torah is dealing with it that the hektish, the sanctification that you made, was effective. Just the Torah is saying you can't bring it on the altar. So you tried to bring it on the altar. So Rava says, the Torah says, well, you can't bring it on the altar. But it sounds like it's still, the sanctity you put into it still works. And it'll go to the other department of hektish, to the Bedek Abayis, where they just own the money inside of it, the money of the animal. According to Abaye, if the Torah didn't say those words of it can't be brought as a carbon, hava mina ka'over mitzvah v'kasher. Abaye says, I would have thought you're not allowed to sanctify something with a blemish to bring as an offering. But if you did, I would have thought you could now bring it as an offering. Kamash Malon. Therefore, the Torah went out of its way to say you can't bring it as an offering. So in other words, the Torah said you can't sanctify an animal with a blemish to bring as an offering. According to Rava, I would have said, so if the Torah says you can't do it, if you try to do it, it's ineffective. So how does Rava know it actually works? Because the Torah says, L'neder lo yiraseh, you can't bring it as an offering. Sounds like the sanctity actually still was effective. And Abaye, the Gemara is saying, no. I would have thought you can't do it, but if you did it, it works. And you can even bring it as an offering, this animal with a blemish. So you have this pasuk, L'neder lo yiraseh, to tell you that no, even though it was effective that the sanctity is on the animal, still you're not allowed to bring it on the offering. The only thing that Beis HaMikdash is going to own is the money in the animal. You can't actually bring it on the altar itself. Okay, the bottom line on Hamid Beis. So until now we were talking about sanctifying an animal with a blemish to bring onto the altar. Now the Gemara is talking about the opposite. What if you would sanctify something without a blemish, something I could bring on the altar, lebedek habayis, to the part of the Beis HaMikdash which is for things that are not brought as a carbon, just the Beis HaMikdash financially owns them. The Torah says, Nidava taseh oso. So buy something with a blemish, the Torah says, go donate it to the financial department of the Beis HaMikdash. Says Rashi, and the Gemara understands that it sounds like, and if it doesn't have a blemish, you're not allowed to donate it to that department. You have to donate it to the part of the Beis HaMikdash that is brought for korbanos. So that's where we see from the Torah that something without a blemish, I'm not supposed to donate it to just the financial part of the Beis HaMikdash. I'm supposed to give it as a carbon. So zeh kodshei bedek habayis v'tznan. So I know I'm not supposed to send an animal without a blemish to the part of the Beis HaMikdash where they won't bring it as a carbon. And the Mishnah said, what if I do that? Even though he went against what the Torah wants, still the Mishnah says it's effective. To Yufta de Rava. So according to Abaye, we understand it's effective because the Torah said not to do it, and if I do it, it's effective. Where it says, according to Rava, why is it effective? So Amr lecha Rava mimakam shenisrabu bali mumel gabi mizbeach nisrabu timim lebedek habayis. Says Rava, just like we just saw that if you can't bring something with a blemish to the mizbeach, to bring as an offering, we saw there was an extra pasuk where the Torah was saying, even though you did something wrong, it was effective. So that itself tells me for the opposite case, that if you would bring something without a blemish and try to give it to not to the mizbeach, but try to give it to the financial part of the Beis HaMikdash, from that same pasuk, I see that's effective. Okay, so we're Vav and Aleph about 6 lines down. Very gezel de rachmana amar lo sigzel. So when it comes to stealing, that the Torah says don't steal. V'tznan hagozel eitzim vasan kelim tzemer vasan begadim. A person who stole a tree and he turned it into a kli. He made a stender out of it. Tzemer, he stole some wool vasan begadim and he made it into a shirt. Mishalim kshasak zela. Says the Mishnah, he pays like the time that he stole. So in other words, normally the halacha is, person steals, you have to return that which you stole. But if a person changes the thing entirely, what the Gemara calls a shinoi, you change it into a totally different item. So you took a tree and you made a bookshelf, you made something out of it. So then you get to keep the item, and you have to pay money. Okay, so there's really a background point. I mean, there's 2 steps here. The Torah says don't steal. So according to Abaye, that the Torah says don't steal. So if I steal, I should get to keep it. Okay, so really, the reason we know that's not true, the sheet over here speaks out, is because the Torah says go return that which you stole. So step 1 in Abaye is if I steal, I would get to keep anything I steal. The Torah says go return what you stole. But says the Gemara, but still, if I would change the item, the Mishnah is saying clearly that I get to keep the item and I just have to pay money. So tiyufta de Rava. According to Abaye, I know you have to give the item back in general because the Torah talked to that case and said go give it back when you steal. However, if you change it, I understand it Abaye where you get to keep it. Says the Gemara, Tiyufta de Rava, but it's a question on Rava. In Rava, where if the Torah says don't steal, so then how can it be that if I now change the object, that it's effective, and I get to keep the item? The Torah told me not to do this. So Amar Lecha Rava, Shiny Hasam Damar Kra, Asher Gazel, Kamasha Gazel. Says Rava, that the reason we know by stealing that if you change it, you get to keep it, is a different pasuk, which we understand that when the Torah said, Hey Shivas like Zela Asher Gazel, return the stolen item, that which you stole. So Chazal understand it means similar to what you stole. But if it's different from what you stole because you changed it, then you get to keep it. According to Abaye, that part of the pasuk Asher Gazel is needed to tell you Al Gzelo Shalom Mosif Chomesh, Al Gzelo Shal Aviv Eina Mosif Chomesh. That if a person steals something himself and then he would deny it and he would swear, then there's a carbon that comes along with it and he has to pay extra money. But if his father stole and then his father passed away and he went through that same process of denying it and swearing, so then the Torah is saying only that which you stole, not that which your father stole. For that you don't pay the chomesh, you don't pay the extra fifth. Okay, by mashkan, if you have somebody who gives a loan to his friend, so Reuven gives Shimon a $100 loan, and then he wants to take a mashkan, something as collateral. So the Torah says you can't go into his house to take it. If it's non, the Mishnah says, what if I did? Machzir asakar balayla. You have to return his pillow at nighttime, when he would use his pillow. And his plow, you have to return daytime. So in other words, the pillow you could keep during the day, you just have to give it back when he needs it. And the plow you could keep at night, you just have to give it back daytime when he needs it. So even though the Torah said don't do this, we see that for the time he doesn't need it, it's effective. I can keep it. To Yufta de Rava, according to Abaye, I understand the Torah said not to do it, and if I do it, it's effective. But according to Rava, I should always have to give it back. Why is it clear that from the Mishnah that there's sometimes I can keep it? So Amar Lecha Rava, Shiny Hasam Damar Kra Hashev Tashiv. Says Rava, the way I know in that case that you have to that there's times that it's effective that you get to keep it is because when the Torah is describing give it back, it's saying for this item give it back at day, for this item give it back at night. So there's an implication in that pasuk itself that is dealing with it that the rest of the time I get to keep it. So that's how Rava sees it's an exception to the rule. Ulabaye, ilav damar achmana shev tashiv. Says Abaye, if not for the Torah saying return it, hava mina isura avat, I would have said you did a negative prohibition. If you want to return it, go for it. If you don't want to return it, you don't have to return it. Kamash Bala. Therefore, the Torah had to go say Hashev Tashiv. You have to return it. Okay. So Vav Amar Aleph, a little more than halfway down the page. When it comes to peya, a person, when he has a field, is obligated to leave over a portion of the field, a corner of the field. So the Torah says, "Osichla pa'as sadecha." You should not totally harvest for yourself the corner of your field. Bikutzrecha. V'tnan, and the Mishnah says, what happens if the person does that? V'tnan mitzvahs peya lahafresh min hakama. The mitzvah of peya is to separate it while it's still by the stalks. Lo hafresh min hakama. If a person didn't do it at that point, yafresh min ha'amrim. So you should do it at the next stage when you bundle up the stuff. Lo hafresh min ha'amrim. If a person didn't separate the peya by the stalks, yafresh min hakri, so then he should do it by the next stage of the process, ad shelo mirchu, before he smoothed it over. Mirchu, if he already got even to that stage, ma'asra v'nosein lo. So then, once you do miruach, then a person's obligated in the gifts to a Kohen and to a Levi, the Truma and the Meiser. So first he says he should separate that, and then he should give the peya. Mishum Rabbi Yishmael Amru, Rabbi Yishmael said, Af mafresh mina isa. Even if you're holding all the way by dough, right, the last stage of the process, the person still didn't give his peya, you still have to give the peya. Tiyufta da Abaye. So says the Gemara. The Torah says you're not supposed to leave you have to leave over the corner of your field. You're not able to harvest the entire field for yourself. And let's say I would. So the Mishnah is clear, it doesn't work. you still have to give the payah. So according to Rava, that says when the Torah says don't do something, and if I do it, it's not effective, so then I understand. Says the Gemara, but according to Abaye, where the Torah said not to do this, and I went and I did it, so why do I still have to give the payah? Why do I still have to give portion of the field to the poor people? Says the Gemara, Tiyufta Abaye, it's a question on Abaye. So Amar Lacha Abaye, Shiny Hasam, Damar Kra, Tazav Yisera. Abaye answers in the pasuk by the mitzvah of payah, of leaving over a corner of the field. It says the word Tazov. It says leave it for the poor person in extra time. That extra time is coming to include this case, that even when the person went against what the Torah wanted, still he needs to do the mitzvah of payah. V'Rava Amar Lacha. So according to Rava, why did it say that word Tazov, an extra time? Why did it say leave it over an extra time? To tell you, Yesh Lecha Ziva Cheres Shekazu. It's talking about a different case. Ve'ezazeh hamafkir karmo. A person who would, to be mafkir means to totally relinquish any ownership of his kerim, of his vineyard. Detanya hamafkir karmo vehishkim l'shachar ubatzro. So the halacha is, if a person relinquishes any ownership on his field, on his vineyard, so then he doesn't have any of the halachas of leaving over payah, etc. Any of the gifts he has to give to a poor person. So this person is very smart. So what does he say? He says, I don't want to give all the gifts to the poor person. So you know what? So I'll relinquish any ownership that I have, and tomorrow I'll go to sleep. Tomorrow morning I'll wake up and I'll reacquire the field. Okay? So he's trying to beat the system, so to speak. So what's the Bryce says, what's the halacha in such a case? Person got rid of any ownership on his kerim, on his vineyard, and in the morning he went and he started harvesting it. He took everything back for himself. Says the Bryce, it doesn't work. Chayiv v'peret v'olulos v'shicha u'v'peya. He's obligated in all the normal gifts he has to give to a poor person. Upater min ha'maiser. He's exempt from maiser. So Rashi explains that by the first four, the Torah says ta'azov, the Torah says an extra leave it for the poor person to come to talk about this case. As opposed to maiser, the gift which is giving to a Levi, the Torah didn't say an extra ta'azov. It didn't say it an extra time you have to give it. So Rav is saying the reason it said an extra ta'azov, an extra time by payah, that a person, you need to leave it over, is not for the case where the person didn't listen and he harvested his whole field and he got all ready to a later process. That I would know anyway, that you still have to give the gift to the poor person. The case I need the extra pasuk is this case where the person got rid of any ownership that he had, then got up the next morning and still took everything back. So the Torah is coming to say, talking to the person who's trying to beat the system, saying you still have to give the gifts to the poor person. Okay, so now the question we've all been waiting for. Okay, we've been going for a daf and a half with the discussion of Abaye v'Rava. Abaye said that when the Torah says don't do something, if I go and I do it, it's not effective. So we had a whole list of cases where it was clear it was effective. So the Gemara answered, Abaye has, those are all exceptions to the rule. Rava started the other way. The Torah says don't do something, and I go and I do it, it's not effective. We had a whole list of cases that it was effective. Those are exceptions to the rule. So ask the Gemara, Omer le Ravacha b'rei de Rava le Ravashi. Hashta dishanin and kolhani shinuyi. Now that we answered all the questions, Abaye v'Rava b'mai pligi. Is there any case that comes out different between Abaye and Rava? Okay, we went through probably 15 cases where they come out exactly the same, even though the starting point was opposite. Ask Gemara, is there any case where I see a practical difference between the two of them? Ribis ktsutza kimiflagi. So the Gemara suggests the difference would be ribis ktsutza. Person gives a loan, and when you give the $100 to the person you're giving it to, it's built in that he has to pay you interest. So in other words, ribis she'ein ktsutza is going to be that it's not built in at the loan at the time. Ribis ktsutza means when you give the loan, it's built in. Here's your $100 on condition that when you pay me back, you pay me $200. So the Gemara is suggesting this disagreement which we found about ribis ktsutza, about interest, that's going to be the difference between Abaye and Rava. So let's see. Rabbi Lazar said, ribis ktsutza yotze b'dayanim. Rabbi Lazar says if a person does this, there's a negative prohibition to not charge interest. Says Rabbi Lazar, but if you would do it, you have to pay it back. In other words, I give a $100 loan. Now my love, person who borrowed from me paid me $200. So I just did a negative prohibition. Says Rabbi Lazar, you have to pay him back. Avak ribis, but if it wouldn't be the formal ribis, eina yotze b'dayanim. So that type of ribis is only rabbinic. It's not from the Torah. So Rabbi Lazar says on that, if the person would accept it, we don't make him pay it back. Rabbi Yochanan Omer afilu ribis ktsutza, says Rabbi Yochanan, even the first case, eina yotze b'dayanim. You still don't have to pay it back. So what do we have? We have a previous disagreement. If a person would go against the Torah which says don't take interest, and he took the interest, Rabbi Lazar saying we make him pay it back. Rabbi Yochanan saying we don't make him pay it back. So the Gemara is suggesting maybe that's the difference between Abaye and Rava. Abaye who says, when the Torah says don't do something, so here the Torah said don't take ribis, don't take interest. So if you would go and take it, it would be effective. And you would not have to pay it back. According to Rava, where the Torah says don't take interest, says the Gemara, well, if you would go and take interest, it's ineffective. You have to pay the money back. So maybe that's the practical difference between Abaye and Rava. So Amr le Hasan b'svara pligi, Hasan b'kroi pligi. Says the Gemara, that case by ribis is not that they're arguing without any psukim. That's really a disagreement because of psukim. The Amr of Yitzchak, my time with the Rabbi Yochanan, because Rabbi Yitzchak explained what's the reason for Rabbi Yochanan who said that even if you take ribis, even if you take interest, you don't need to pay back. Omar kra b'neshech nosan v'tarbis lakach v'chai lo yichya. Because in the pasuk which is describing taking interest, the pasuk says v'chai lo yichya, that like his punishment will be he won't be alive. L'chayim nitain, the punishment is a removal of his life, v'lo lihishaven, but not we don't punish him by making him pay back. Ravacha barada amar mehacha. He said a different source for the opinion that says you don't need to pay back, because it says v'yareisam elokecha ani Hashem. Because in the parsha describing interest, it says you should fear Hashem. You should fear from your God. I am Hashem. L'mora nasate v'lo lihishaven. That the Torah is talking to the person, you should fear me. Sounds like to the exclusion of we don't make him pay back. Rava Amar mehacha. Rava says a different source for the opinion who says you don't need to pay back interest. It says hatoivos ha'el also mos you must damav bo yihiyeh v'holid ben paritz. So in the pasuk which is describing a case of a person who took interest, so it talks to him like he killed somebody. Shofech dam. Hukshu malvi ribis l'shofchei damim. You see, the pasuk is connecting a person who took interest like a person who killed. Ma shofchei damim lo nitnu le'shaven. Just like if a person kills somebody, then there's no way for him to return that which he just did. Af malvi ribis lo nitnu le'shaven. So too, if a person gives interest, he doesn't need to pay back for what he did. Okay, so let's see one more line and then we'll summarize. V'omer Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, my time with Rabbi Lazar, and Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, he says, what's the source of the other opinion? Rabbi Lazar said if you take interest, you need to pay back. So what's his source? Because the Torah says your brother should live with you. Ahadar le, you should give it back. Ki heichi denichne imach. You should give back his money so that he should be able to live with you. Give him his money back. So the Gemara suggested maybe the practical difference between Abaye and Rava is if a person would take interest. Because in Abaye, where the Torah says you shouldn't take interest, if I would go and I would take it, it would be effective. And therefore I don't need to pay back. In Rava, where if the Torah says don't take interest, and I go and I take interest, it's ineffective. So then I would have to pay back. The Gemara's response is that no, basically the same as every other example we brought up. In the discussion of taking interest, we have psukim on both sides. There's a source for the opinion you do need to take back and a source for the opinion you don't need to take back. And once it's based on the sources, on the psukim, so then it's possible Abaye and Rava could hold like either opinion. So we're back to square one. Is there any practical case that comes out different between Abaye and Rava? So the Gemara says, Ela, but my kimifli, what's the practical case? My kimifli Abaye v'Rava b'shinoi kona. So the Gemara is really, Pash says it's changing from what we said earlier. The practical difference is what would happen if a person stole and then he changed the object from what he stole. So according to Abaye, where the Torah says, if you go against what I tell you, it's effective. So then if a person steals a tree and he turns it into a bookcase, even though he did something wrong, it would be effective. He gets to keep the bookcase and he has to pay the person the money for the money that he stole from him. According to Rava, where the Torah says, if you go against what I told you, it does not work, the Gemara is saying, so then if you would steal the tree and turn it into the bookcase, you'd have to give back the bookcase. Okay, so the case, which the Gemara is saying is the difference between Abaye and Rava, is the case of stealing, turning it into a different item. If you say when the Torah says don't do something, if you go and do it, it is effective. So then if the Gazlan, the thief, would change the item, he now gets to keep the item and he has to pay back money. If you say it's not effective, then even when he changes the item, he still needs to pay back. He still needs to pay back the item itself, and he's not allowed to pay money for it. Okay. Lashon Acher, right after the two dots. Behadi shenuye deshaninan beribis ktsutza, l'Abaye lo mahader ribis, l'Rava mahader ribis. Okay, I mean, we tried to suggest before that maybe the difference between the two is that according to Abaye, if you would take interest, you don't need to pay back. And according to Rava, you do need to pay back. So the Gemara asked the question of that before. The Gemara is going to ask another question of that suggestion. Abaye nami savar mafkina ribis ktsutza b'dayanim. Says the Gemara, Abaye himself, we see, holds that if you take this interest, you do need to pay back. The Gemara was suggesting Abaye, who holds if you go against the negative commandment, which says don't take interest. If you would take interest, you wouldn't have to give it back. Says the Gemara, I'll prove to you from Abaye himself that's not true. Abaye said, Hadein demasik b'chavri arba zuzi b'revisa. A person who owed his friend 4 zuz, who was owed by his friend 4 zuz, let's say $4. V'yavi leila malve b'chanuse glima deshavi chamsha be'arba. And the borrower paid back his malva, the person who lent him the money, with a shirt which was worth, let's say, $5, and he gave it to him as a $4 shirt. Ki mafkinen minei dalad mafkinen minei. Says Abaye, because you gave it to him as $4, so then you only collect from the malva, from the person who gave the loan, $4. By zuzi b'matanu diyayivle. And you look at it as the extra dollar was a gift that the borrower is giving back to the lender. Rava says no. Chamisha mafkinan minei. You take $5 back from the malva, from the lender. My time. Why is that? Kuli b'ter servisa kaseli yadei. You view it as the $5 shirt which he gave to him as $4. Is he really gave him a $5 gift? So this is a local disagreement between Abaye and Rava of how to look at this specific case. But they're both in agreement to the premise that if he would give him $5 or even the $4, you for sure take it away from the lender. So to suggest that Abaye holds if a person would take interest, he doesn't need to pay back, the Gemara is saying Abaye himself said not like that. So Ela ki kamifli Abaye v'Rava b'shinoi kona. So this is another reason to go back to the other answer, to say the difference between Abaye and Rava is the case of a person who stole, and he turned the object into something different, that according to Abaye, he would get to keep the object, and according to Rava, he wouldn't get to keep the object. Okay, we're up to the 2 dots Vav Beis is about 6 lines down in the wide lines. Temurah Rabbanan. Kol asher bo mum lo sakrivu. So the pasuk says, an animal which has a blemish, you can't be makriv it. So what does it mean you can't be makriv it? It says the Gemara, matal malomer. What's that coming to teach me? Im belo sishchetu. If it's coming to tell me an animal with a blemish, you're not able to shecht it, you're not able to slaughter it. Harei kvar amor lamata. The Gemara says, well, we're going to learn that out from a pasuk later. So what does the Torah here mean when it says an animal with a blemish, you shouldn't be makriv it? So it doesn't mean you shouldn't slaughter it. So what does it mean? Bal takdishu. It means you shouldn't sanctify it. You shouldn't give an animal with a blemish to the part of the Beis HaMikdash that you're trying to bring it as an offering. It says the Gemara, Mikan Amru, from here we learned, Hamakdish Bale Mumin Gabe Mizbeach, if a person would take an animal with a blemish, which cannot be brought as a carbon, as an offering, and he would donate it to the Beis HaMikdash to bring it as an offering, over Mishum Chamisha Shemas, he did 5 things wrong. Mishum Baal Takrivu or Baal Takdishu. Number 1 is the Torah says you're not supposed to sanctify it. That's number 1. Number 2, Baal Tishchatu. Number 2 is when he goes and he shechs it, he slaughters it. That's transgression number 2. Mishum Baal Tizriku. So the Gemara is going to learn out later that when they sprinkle the blood, that's transgression number 3. Mishum Baal Taktiru, when they burn up the parts which they burn up, that's transgression number 4. Baal Taktiru Kulo, if they burn up the whole thing, that's the 4th. Mishum Baal Taktiru Miktsaso. And if they would do part of it, that's also a 5th transgression. So we'll see a little bit later. The Gemara is going to explain the source for all of these. Mishum Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Af Kabbalas Adam. He says even just accepting the blood would be another transgression. Okay, so let's see the source of this. Omer Mar Imbal Tishchetu Arikvar Omer Lamata. So we said before. So we talked about one pasuk which was Vayikra Chaf Beis Chaf. So that was Kol Asher Bum Lo Sakrivu. So we said that really means anything with a blemish, a person is not supposed to sanctify. In the sanctification, he just did a prohibition. Okay, so says the Gemara, you said that I already know that you're not able to slaughter an animal with a blemish. So Heichan Amr, where did you know that from? Says the Gemara, Detanya. Because I learned in a Braisa, Averis o Shavor o Charutz o Yabelas. So the pasuk is giving a whole list of blemishes that an animal has. And the pasuk says, Lo Sakrivu. Person shouldn't bring it as an offering. So matal malomer, what do those words mean? Ibal takdishu, if it means I shouldn't sanctify it, harei kvar amar lamayla. Well, I already learned that out from a pasuk above, that if you have an animal with a blemish, there's a prohibition to sanctify it. Matal malomer bal takrivu. So what is this pasuk? This is 2 psukim later. What does it mean when you say the same animal with a blemish, you shouldn't be makriv it? What does that mean? It means bal tishchetu. It means you shouldn't shecht it. Okay, so far we have one pasuk teaching me that the animal with the blemish, I can't sanctify it to the part of the mizbeach, the part of the Beis HaMikdash to bring it as an offering. Number 2 is saying, and you're not able to shecht it, you're not able to slaughter it either. Now the next part of that pasuk, Isha lo sitnu mehem, elu ishim, and it says you shouldn't put it on the fire. That's coming to say that you shouldn't burn it up. That's prohibition number 3. Ein li ela kulan. All I know is if you would burn up all the things that get burned up, you would do this prohibition. Miktsasan minayin. How do I know if you even did a portion of it, you still did that prohibition? Talmud Omer mehem. It said, don't put on the fire mehem, from them. Sounds like even a portion of them would be a prohibition. Zrikas damim minayin. How do you know that if they do the step of the process of sprinkling the blood of this carbon, which has a blemish, that's another prohibition? Talmud Omer ala mizbeach lashem ala mizbeach, because it says don't put them on the altar. The thing that goes on the altar is the sprinkling of the blood. And the end of the pasuk, lashem l'rabos seira mishtaleach. Says the Gemara, that's coming to include that the seira mishtaleach. So this is on Yom Kippur. On Yom Kippur, they bring 2 seirs, right? And what do? They bring it in and they do a lottery. One is going to be brought as an offering to Hashem. That's the Seir Lashem. And the other is the Seir Lazazel. It's sent out. So the Gemara understands that last part of the pasuk Lashem is coming to include that Seir which is sent out, that there's a problem if it would have a blemish. Ask the Gemara, Lashem l'rabosu? Is it true that when you have a pasuk and it says Lashem, that it's coming to include something? Right? We just said that Lashem is coming to include another case in the prohibition of having a blemish. Even that Seir, which gets sent out on Yom Kippur, can't have a blemish. Says the Gemara, is that the right way to learn a pasuk, that the word Lashem is coming to include another case? Vatanya, but we learned in a brayso, O karbon. So this is talking about a person shouldn't, something which is kudshim, which has sanctity, a person is not able to shecht it, to slaughter it outside of the Beis HaMikdash. So Shemea ani af kadshe bedek abayis, shenikru karbon. So the Bryce is saying, the Torah said you shouldn't slaughter a karbon, an offering outside the Beis HaMikdash. So I would have thought even something which is not going to be brought as an offering, it's just part of the bedek habayis, it's part of the Beis HaMikdash where they just financially own the animal, but not for an offering. So I would have thought maybe if I would take something which the Beis HaMikdash owns as the bedek habayis, and I would take it outside and slaughter it, I would think that I transgressed the prohibition of slaughtering things belonging to the Beis HaMikdash outside, and I would be obligated in karis, which would be, that would be the punishment. Ke'inyan shenemer, because I found that even the part of the Beis HaMikdash which they don't own the animals for the offering itself, they just own the financial part in them, it's still called a karbon. The pasuk refers to it as an offering, because it says Venick as karbon Hashem. It says bring the karbon of Hashem, and in that pasuk it starts describing utensils used in the Beis HaMikdash, nothing that's an offering. So how do I know that that's not included in the prohibition and the punishment of slaughtering things belonging to the Beis HaMikdash outside? Talmud Lomer, because in that pasuk it says Vel Pesach Oel Moed. It says, and he didn't bring it into the Beis HaMikdash to be slaughtered. Haroi la Pesach Oel Moed Chayavin Alav Mishum Shochtei Chutz. Something which it would have been proper for him to have brought inside when he slaughtered it. He would be obligated if he brought it outside. But she'ein roi lepesach ha'omoed ein chayavin alav mishum shochtei chutz. But something which it would be improper for him to have brought it inside to slaughter, because it really is not an offering. Like this case where the Beis HaMikdash just owns the financial parts in the animal. So if I would bring it outside, that's excluded from this conversation. So otzi ani as elu v'loti paras chatas v'sir mishtaleach she'ein re'uyan lepesach ha'omoed. So says the Brisa, but how do I know? What if you would take a para duma? Right, a couple parishes ago about the process of the cow, and there's a whole process that you do with it which helps purify people. The seir mishtaleach, or the seir which is sent out on Yom Kippur, which could be brought, they're fitting to be brought inside the Beis HaMikdash. They're not, but there's nothing wrong with them. So how do I know that if a person would shecht them in the improper way, that he didn't do something wrong? Talmud Lomer Lashem. So the Brisa says, because I learned from Lashem, Mishim Yuchadim Lashem, only offerings which are unique, that the whole thing is Lashem, is for Hashem, Yatzu Ei Lashem Yuchadim Lashem. To the exclusion of these two examples, the paraduma, which is meant to purify people, and the Sir Mishtaleach, which is not brought as an offering, it's really sent outside. So the Bryce is dealing with, in this context, that we're excluding from the word Hashem, we're limiting the prohibition of shechting, of slaughtering things belonging to the Beis HaMikdash outside. Okay, so outside, the question is that when we were discussing the prohibition of having an animal which has a blemish, so there we learned from the word Lashem that there's another type of offering which has that same prohibition. Right? The seir, the animal which is sent outside on Yom Kippur, also has the prohibition that it can't have a blemish. Where did we learn that out? Because in that pasuk it said an extra word Lashem, which came to include an extra animal, that's seir, which gets sent outside. So that's one place where we see the Gemara was using the word Lashem to include something into that prohibition. So ask the Gemara, but when you're discussing the prohibition of slaughtering things belonging to the Beis HaMikdash outside, the Brisa did the exact opposite. It said, I'm going to limit the prohibition from that same word Lashem. It said, how do I know to exclude that same seir, that animal which gets sent outside in Yom Kippur? Because it says Lashem, something which is specific Lashem to the exclusion of that case. So the question is, when the pasuk says Lashem, is it coming to include an extra offering, or it's coming to exclude an extra offering? So Amar Rava answers Hasa Minyane Dekra. So Rava says it depends on the context. Over there where it says El Pesach, which is L'Rabos, so then Lashem is Lahotzi. Says Rava, where it says El Pesach, when it's talking about slaughtering things belonging to the Beis HaMikdash outside. So when the Torah said El Pesach, it said anything which would be brought inside. That was very broad. So then when it said Lashem, which is extra because it already would have been included, so why did it say an extra word? It must be it's coming to exclude. But over here, Hacha D'Ishe Lahotzi Lashem L'Rambos. But over here, where the starting point would have been that this seir, this animal sent outside, would be excluded, so then the extra word is coming to include. So Rav is saying it depends on the context. That if, basically, what is Lashem, it's extra either way. If the starting point is this case would be included, so then when the pasuk says another word Lashem, you ask yourself, if it's already included, then why is the Torah saying an extra word? It must be it's coming to say that which you thought was included is really excluded. But if the starting point would be that it's excluded, so then when the Torah says another Lashem, well, it's not coming to exclude it. I already know it's excluded. It must be it's coming to include it. Okay, says the Gemara about 7 lines from the bottom. Time with the Dechsiv Kra Lashemhu to Lamaisis Yer Mishtalech. You just learned out from a pasuk that the reason I know that you can't have an animal with the seir which is sent outside in Yom Kippur, I learned from a pasuk that it can't have a mum, it can't have a blemish. Says the Gemara, Hello Rabbi Kra. Sounds like you were saying, without this pasuk, Hava minas yer mishtaleach bal mum shaper dami. Sounds like without this pasuk, it would have been no problem for that animal to have a blemish. Says the Gemara, I don't understand. Michti ein hagoro kavua ella bedavar haroi. What the Gemara is asking is, think about what you do. You bring in 2 animals, and then you do a lottery. One says Lashem, one says this is going to be brought as an offering, and one says it's not going to be brought as an offering. So when you bring both animals in, you don't know which is going to be brought as an offering. So how is it possible that you would think one of the 2 animals could have a blemish? In other words, if it would be very clear which animal was going to be brought as an offering and which it wasn't, so then you could hear that the one which was not going to be brought as an offering, maybe it could have a blemish. But basically, you're bringing 2 animals in at once. And the one which is going to be brought as an offering for sure cannot have a blemish. And when I bring both in, I don't know which one it's going to be. So even without this extra pasuk, I would say, well, there's a good chance, there's a 50-50 chance this one's going to be an offering. So it can't have a blemish when I bring it in. I'm running a big risk. So why do you need a pasuk? Why do you need an extra pasuk to come to tell me it can't have a blemish? Even without that pasuk, I would know it can't have a blemish, because I can't run a 50-50 risk of bringing an offering with something with a blemish. So Amar Rav Yosef Hamani Chanana Mitzrihi. Rav Yosef says, we're going like the opinion of Chanana Mitzri. To Amar Afilu Dam Bechor Mevi Chaveru Umezaviglei. Because he said that, Dam Bekos. Even if you're at the very late stage of the process on Yom Kippur, and you already have the blood of the one which was shechted, one which was slaughtered in the kos, in the cup, and the other one died. So he says, what do you do? So you bring another animal. Just bring another one. So right now the Gemara is understanding that he has a case where you never really have to do the lottery. So since he has a case where you never have to do the lottery, so therefore I would have thought that animal you could bring even with a blemish, And that's why I need the pasuk to say, even in that case where there's no lottery, so there's no risk, still you're not allowed to bring it if it has a blemish. So ask the Gemara, you can't prove that Chanana Mitzri holds that you don't need to do a new lottery. Maybe you bring 2 more animals and you do a lottery, and whatever one is going sent outside, then you pair it up with the original animal which is already shechted. You can't prove that you're just bringing 1 new animal. Maybe you bring both and still do another lottery. Tilma Maisi Makro, maybe you bring both and you do another lottery. So we're back to the question, we need a case where you don't need to do a lottery, and therefore it would be clear that which animal is going to be sent outside. So without this pasuk, I would have thought you could bring an animal even with a blemish. So I need a pasuk to say, no, you can't bring it with a blemish. So Ela Amar Rav Yosef Hamani Reb Shimoni. It's the opinion of Reb Shimon. The Tanya Meis Echad Mehem Mevi Chaveira B'lo Hagrilla. Tivri Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon said explicitly that if one of them died, you bring the other one without a new lottery. So because he said explicit, you bring the second one without a new lottery. So that would be the way that I would have thought it could even have a blemish. Comes the pasuk and says it can't have a blemish. Rav Amar Lo Nitzracha Kigot Shehumah Bayom V'Chilo Achaver. Rav says I have another case. That let's say you had an animal with a blemish, and then you went to redeem it. In other words, you already did the lottery. This one is set aside to be sent outside. And then I went and I redeemed it with another one with a blemish. So another case where it's very clear that this animal is going to be sent outside because I already did the lottery and then I'm redeeming it after the fact. So without this pasuk, I would have said maybe there's no problem because this one's not going to be brought as an offering. Pasuk is going to be coming to say, even in that case, you're not allowed to do it if it has a blemish. I would have said originally you can't bring an animal with a blemish because you're not sure which one's going to be brought as a carbon. Aval hacha, but in these cases, because it's very obvious that this one without a blemish is going to be brought as a carbon. So I would have thought this one, which is not going to be brought as an offering, it would not be a problem if it had a blemish. Kamash Malon, therefore I learned from this pasuk, even in those cases, there's a prohibition for that seir being sent outside to have a blemish.